The rifle was almost as tall as she was. That was the first thing people noticed, and the last thing she wanted them to notice. But she had long since accepted that the world was going to look at her and see the wrong things before it eventually, reluctantly, saw the right ones. She was 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 122 pounds on the morning she first picked up a Barrett M82.50 caliber anti-materiel rifle. And the sergeant standing behind her made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a warning. He said, quietly enough that only she could hear it, that she might want to choose a different weapon. She did not respond. She settled into the prone position, adjusted her body to the stock, found her natural point of aim, and put her eye to the scope. Her name was Rachel Carver, and she had been hearing some version of that sentence her entire life. Too small, too slight, too young, too female. The words changed depending on the context, but the structure was always the same. A statement that began with her physical reality and ended with a conclusion about her capability that had nothing to do with her actual capability. She had been listening to these statements for 26 years, and she had developed, over that time, a very specific relationship with them. She did not argue. She did not get angry. She simply noted them, and then went and did the thing they said she could not do. She grew up in a small town in rural Montana, the middle child of 3, with an older brother named Daniel and a younger sister named Cora. Her father, James Carver, was a man who had grown up hunting and who believed that the ability to move quietly through wild terrain and place a shot accurately was a skill as fundamental and as worthy of respect as any other. He did not make a distinction between which of his children should learn it. He took all 3 of them out into the mountains around their town every fall from the time they were old enough to carry a .22 rifle safely. And he taught them the same things in the same order, with the same patience and the same expectations. Rachel was the one who took to it completely. Daniel was a capable hunter who enjoyed the ritual of it, the early mornings and the cold and the communal satisfaction of a successful season. Cora found the patience it required genuinely difficult and eventually channeled her considerable energy in other directions. Rachel found the patience not just bearable, but natural, as if sitting still and watching and waiting for exactly the right moment was something her nervous system had been calibrated for. She could lie in field grass for 3 hours watching a tree line without moving. She could read wind conditions from the behavior of leaves and grass and the way distant objects shimmered in heat. She could hold her breath for the 2.5 seconds between heartbeats that a shot required and release it with a steadiness that her father, who was not a man given to easy praise, described as a gift. By the time she was 16, she was shooting better than her father. By 17, she was shooting better than any man in the county who had agreed to be measured against her, which was not all of them because some declined, instinctively uncomfortable with the comparison, and some who accepted were not comfortable afterward with the result. She shot at regional competitions and placed in the top 3 consistently, won twice, and was described in the local newspaper in terms that always mentioned her size before they mentioned her skill. The diminutive Rachel Carver, the paper wrote, after one victory. She clipped the article and kept it in a drawer, and sometimes, when she needed to remember why she did what she did, she took it out and looked at the word diminutive and let it remind her that she had something to prove to people who would never stop needing to be proven to. She enlisted in the Army at 18. Shortly after completing high school with grades that were excellent in mathematics and geography and less excellent in subjects that required her to sit still and listen rather than to move and observe. The recruiter she spoke to was a friendly man named Sergeant Phillips who went through the standard paperwork with her and then looked at her physical measurements and told her, with the practiced neutrality of someone delivering information they believed to be helpful, that her size might limit some of the roles available to her. She told him she wanted to be considered for the infantry. He told her that was a conversation that would need to happen at a higher level. She told him to make that happen. The conversation happened. It was followed by another conversation, and another, and a series of physical assessments that she passed without difficulty because her strength was not the visible kind that impresses at first glance, but the functional kind that impresses when tested. The kind built from years of moving through difficult terrain, carrying game out of the mountains, and doing physical work that had no gym rat aesthetics but had real-world requirements. She could ruck 40 pounds for 15 miles over broken ground. She could low crawl through cover for distances that exhausted men twice her size. She was faster than most and quieter than almost all of them, She went through basic training at Fort Jackson, and then through advanced individual training, and then through a combination of performance and persistence that wore down the institutional resistance the way water wears down stone, into a slot in a Ranger-affiliated battalion that was experimenting, cautiously, with female soldiers in non-combat support roles that were adjacent to combat operations without officially being combat operations. The distinction was important to the Army's institutional framework. It was entirely irrelevant to the actual nature of what she was doing, which involved moving through hostile terrain and being shot at with some regularity the first time she came under fire. She was 20 years old, in a mountainous region where the elevation made everything harder and the cold made everything slower. 3 men in her unit were experienced soldiers with multiple deployments. She had 0 deployments and had been in the country for 11 days. The contact lasted 6 minutes and involved her relocating under fire twice, treating a minor wound on the soldier next to her while rounds were still incoming, and returning accurate fire that her team leader later described in his after-action assessment as having been placed with a precision that he had not expected and that had contributed materially to suppressing the opposing fire, what he did not write in the official report. But what he said to her privately afterward was that she had been the calmest person in the contact. Not fearless, he noted, because fearlessness in combat was a liability, the product of not understanding what was actually happening, calm, grounded, present in the situation in a way that allowed her to think clearly when the situation was designed to make thinking clearly impossible. She took this observation and turned it over in her mind for a long time. She had known, in an instinctive way, that she processed high-stress situations differently from many people around her, that the narrowing of perception that stress produced in others seemed in her case to produce a kind of clarity instead, a sharpening of focus that made the essential things more visible rather than less. She had experienced something like this during difficult shots in hunting situations, when the animal was at the edge of range and the wind was uncertain and the light was failing and everything conspired to make the shot uncertain. In those moments, the rest of the world went quiet, and the distance between her and what she was looking at collapsed into a single, clean problem that she was capable of solving. She had not yet put a name to this quality. The Army would eventually give her several names for it, none of them as accurate as the original experience. But the quality itself was already fully formed by the time she first came under fire in those mountains, already doing the work it would continue to do for the next decade in places and circumstances that would have seemed impossible to her at 18. Sitting in a recruiting office in Montana, being told that her size might be a limiting factor, she returned from her first deployment with 2 things she had not had before: a combat patch on her right shoulder and a reputation in her unit that had nothing to do with her size and everything to do with what she had demonstrated she could do with it. The reputation spread, as reputations in small military communities do, through the informal network of people who had been there and seen it and told someone else who told someone else until the story, inevitably slightly larger than the original event, was known to people who had never met her. It was through this informal network that she came to the attention of a sniper school instructor named Staff Sergeant Kenneth Voss, who had 17 years in the Army and who had spent the last 6 of them selecting and training the soldiers who would become the unit's designated marksmen and, occasionally, its qualified snipers. Voss was not a man who was easily impressed. He had seen many soldiers who were technically accurate shooters and fewer who combined that accuracy with the tactical intelligence and the emotional regulation that sniper work actually required. He had heard about Rachel Carver from 3 separate people before he ever requested to meet her. When he did meet her, she was sitting in a briefing room, reading a field manual that was not required reading for her current assignment, with the focused attention of someone who was studying rather than passing time. He sat down across from her and introduced himself. Sniper school was designed to break people, not maliciously, not because the instructors enjoyed watching students fail, but because the work it prepared you for was itself designed to break people. And the only way to know who would hold together under that pressure was to apply the pressure before the stakes were real. The Army sniper course ran for nearly 8 weeks and covered ballistics, stalking, observation and target detection, fieldcraft, and the particular psychological architecture that distinguished a sniper from a soldier who could simply shoot accurately. Of the soldiers who started any given class, roughly a third would finish. The others would recycle or wash out entirely, not because they lacked courage, but because courage was not the primary qualification. Patience was. Precision was. The ability to suppress every human instinct toward comfort and movement and self-expression, and to become, for extended periods, a thing that the environment did not notice. Rachel arrived at the course as the only woman in a class of 23. She had known this would be the case and had made a deliberate decision about how to manage it. She was not going to draw attention to it. She was not going to apologize for it. She was not going to perform any emotion about it at all, neither the aggressive defiance that said she had something to prove nor the careful friendliness that said she was hoping to be accepted. She was going to do the work and let the work speak for itself. And anyone who had a problem with her presence was going to have to express that problem to someone who had time and energy to address it. Which was not her. The first week was almost entirely physical. Rucking, crawling, carrying, moving through terrain under load in conditions that were cold and wet because the course had been deliberately timed to run through a period when the weather in the training area was reliably miserable. 2 men dropped in the first 3 days, not from injury, but from the accumulation of physical and mental stress that exceeded what they had available to spend. Rachel noted their departure without comment. She was tired in ways she had not been tired before. A deep structural fatigue that reached into parts of her body she had not known were possible to exhaust. She ate every calorie she was issued and slept every minute available to her, and went back out the next morning, and did it again. Voss was not in the class directly. His role was supervisory, observing the instructors and reviewing the training records as the class progressed. But he appeared occasionally at the training area, watching from a position far enough back that the students were not always aware of him. Rachel was aware of him. She had developed, over years of hunting, the particular sensitivity to observation that came from spending time in environments where being watched had consequences. She did not acknowledge his presence when she noticed it. She simply continued what she was doing, which was the only useful response to being observed. The Barrett M82 arrived in the 3rd week, along with the other long-range precision weapons that made up the course's technical curriculum. The class gathered around the weapons on a range table, and the lead instructor, a veteran named Masters who had the economy of movement and the flat affect of someone who had been in serious situations and had learned to store his reactions rather than display them, walked through the specifications of each weapon. The Barrett was last. He picked it up with the practiced ease of long familiarity and ran through its specifications. 29 pounds unloaded, 57 inches in length, capable of accurate fire to ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. Chambered for the .50 BMG cartridge, which carried enough energy at extreme range to defeat light vehicle armor. He put it down on the table and told the class to come forward one at a time and handle it. When Rachel's turn came, she stepped forward and picked up the rifle. It was, as she had known it would be, enormous in her hands. The barrel extended well past her body in the ready position, and the stock required her to adjust her grip significantly from the position the weapon had been designed around, which was a grip designed for hands larger than hers. She held it and felt its weight and the particular balance of it. Front heavy, designed to dampen recoil rather than to be easy to carry. And she thought about the problem it presented with the focused attention she brought to all problems that interested her. Masters was watching her. He said nothing. She put the weapon back down and stepped back into the line. That evening, she stayed on the range after the rest of the class had been dismissed and asked Masters if she could spend additional time with the Barrett in the dry fire position. He looked at her for a moment, the measuring look of an instructor who was determining whether a request was motivated by genuine need or by something else. He told her she could have 30 minutes. She spent those 30 minutes not shooting, but adjusting, experimenting with grip positions and stock placement and prone angles that would give her the maximum stability with the weapon's recoil while maintaining her ability to quickly reacquire a target after the shot. The Barrett's recoil was significant even for large men who handled it with full preparation. For someone her size, it